I went to their offices and I came back with a 2-year lease extension. And that was the best we could get. They were hard as nails. They wouldn't accept. But I had a fabulous time working with IAE, which was one of the 4 remaining of the 5 partners.
It would be unreasonable to demand a new engine to replace an engine that has a repeat inspection interval driven by the manufacturer for safety reasons. But in the past,
it was maybe an old-fashioned way, but they didn't give you a lot of help or a lot of guidance. They weren't totally outright rude or mean.
Hi everyone, welcome to this very special year-end episode of the Flightpath with Alok, my podcast at which I meet industry leaders from the aircraft leasing industry. Today I have 2 very special guests, 2 gentlemen from whom I have learned and grown with personally and professionally as well. They both played a key role in the industry so far. Their careers have shown guidance and light to a lot of upcoming professionals. And today I have the honor of welcoming both of them at the same time, Mr. Donal Lowry and Mr. Ian Clark. Gentlemen, welcome to this year end special episode of Flight Path with Alok. I must thank both of you to make time from your busy schedules. For our audience, we are recording a truly multinational episode today. I am right now in Bangalore in the studios of our production partner Spooler, and Donal Lowry, he is in Ireland, and Ian Clark, he is in Great Britain. So we're all in different parts of the world, and having this a great opportunity to talk to each other and share some thoughts and ideas. What I would like to do is maybe start with a more detailed introductions to my guests. Donal, if I may request you first, please to go ahead and give us a little introduction about yourself, about your in brief your career journey and what you're doing currently, and how you're associated with aircraft leasing and finance industry. And then I would request same from Ian, please.
thank you, Alok, and good afternoon for you, and good morning to Ian also. It's a bit early here in Ireland. I know I have a hard act to follow here. You had some very good previous candidates on these webcasts, such as David Power, who was my ex-CEO in ORIX, Hank Gibson, Enda Swan, and to name but a few, and Feroz Tarapour, who was also my ex-boss in DAE. So I'll give you a brief outline of my career to date. I can give you the long version, but I think the short version it would be enough. Way back in 1969, or even 68, I first got interested in aviation. And my first real introduction was when I met an Air Force, the US Air Force technical guy on leave in Ireland from Vietnam, visiting a neighbour's house, and he told me with the stories of the flying and the repairs, etc., that he was doing in Vietnam. So it set the first seed for me. So I was at the time going to secondary school, which was mainly academics. So I changed to a technical school, which my mother at the time supported. And then I joined the Irish Air Corps, on an apprenticeship scheme in 1969. I stayed there until 1976, and for the last few years there, I was a member of the helicopter crew, the helicopter flight and rescue crew. So I was involved as a crew member also on air sea rescue. And coincidentally, this Friday, the 24th, we have the 60th anniversary of the helicopter flight in the Irish Air Corps. In 1963, the helicopter, the LOS-3, was introduced. So it should be interesting to meet old comrades on Friday. After the Air Corps, I qualified with a license on helicopters, and I went to work for a Dutch company called Schreiner Airways, and I spent 2 years in Iran. They had a company set up in Iran called the Helicopter Aviation Service. So they supported the oil and gas industry, television company, and some exploration companies because of the terrain in Iran, desert and high mountains. They were only accessible by helicopter. So I was more or less like a flying spanner. So I saw all parts of that lovely country, Iran, by helicopter. Then, unfortunately, the revolution started, and so I had to leave Iran at short notice. Came back to Ireland and joined Aer Lingus as an aircraft mechanic in 1978. In Aer Lingus, I progressed on to working on Boeing aircraft mainly, doing some licenses, and my career path changed a little there. So after Aer Lingus divested the MRO, I stayed with the airline, and eventually I was maintenance manager and head of airworthiness. I left Aer Lingus in 2004 and joined ORIX Aviation. But I should say, while in Aer Lingus, I cut my teeth on and got a good introduction to the concept of aircraft leasing, because Aer Lingus at the time, the winter schedule, they had surplus aircraft. So they subleased them to the USA to holiday charter companies in Minneapolis and Cleveland, St. Louis, and one or two other cities. So I was involved with that deeply on the technical side and putting the aircraft on either US register or Spanish register, because Futura was a sister company of Aer Lingus, and they also put some lift into America for the winter. So that was very interesting projects for me while I was in Aer Lingus. And I knew some leasing community in Dublin because Aer Lingus had leased aircraft from them, and I dealt with them quite a bit. So the natural progression or career progression at the time was to join a leasing company. So I joined ORIX in 2004, and I was with them for 11 years. I was head of technical in ORIX. For the last 2 years in ORIX, I spent time in Singapore in a technical role and then in a commercial role. And that entailed a lot of travel in the Asian region, including China mainly, and Indonesia and Malaysia. After spending the 2 years in Singapore, I then decided it was too long to go home all in one go, so I dropped off in Dubai, and I worked for Dubai Aerospace for 1.5 years. After that, I joined Elix Aviation Capital, which was a commuter leasing company in Dublin. They've since renamed themselves. I just forget the name. In the last few years, so I spent a year with them on turboprops as head of technical, which was very interesting and challenging. And then I left after 1 year and decided to retire, but that didn't last too long. And then I joined Acumen, as you know. Alok and I spoke many times, so I joined the team in Acumen, and I spent, I can't remember exactly, maybe 2 years supporting Acumen, and then I retired again. So I probably have retired nearly 3 times, because I'm retired again now. And the latter part of my career in the recent past, I did some project work during COVID for aircraft early terminations and transitions, and overseeing or managing aircraft that were in transition. So I retired again in about May or June of this year, and that's where I am today in a very brief summary.
Interesting. And I know we'll talk about it through the rest of the recording, but there are a lot of cross points there, so to speak. We'll kindly move on to Ian. Ian, if I may please request you, likewise, to give us a little summary of your career. That will be great, please.
Okay, not quite the adventure and the far off places that Donal got to, but mine started, yes. So a 16-year-old Ian Clark left school and signed up for an apprenticeship as a fitter and turner. So working on some fairly heavy industrial machines and machining equipment. So I spent the first 12 months of my working life working a radial arm drill, which was about the same size as this room. It was enormous, drilling huge holes day in, day out. And I thought, is this life? Is this the way it's going? Contemplated not even completing that apprenticeship. Flirted with the idea of joining the fire service. But yeah, I knuckled down, got through the apprenticeship, and it was good. From there, shortly after the apprenticeship finished, I was fortunate enough to get a job in a shipbuilding establishment. So where I'm from, Birkenhead, on the River Mersey, has a significant heritage for shipbuilding, from Confederate gunships to Royal Naval aircraft carriers, hundreds and hundreds of significant vessels. So I really enjoyed the shipyard, introduced me to some tough men who taught you some good lessons of how to behave with the workforce. But yeah, that didn't look like it had a sustainable future. Shipbuilding was on the demise in the UK. I was a young man who was recently married, and I needed to get into something I thought had longevity. And that opportunity came not far from home, is an Airbus plant where they manufacture the wings for Airbus aircraft. There was a big recruitment drive for this new aircraft that was coming to market called the A320. And people with engineering skills were invited to supplement the workforce. So that was a great gateway and opportunity for me to join aviation. I didn't enjoy it. I got in there and it was factory life, and it was very repetitive. It was very different to what I'd been used to, with the variation of a working role. So I probably lasted about 6 or 7 months, but I managed to put enough on an application form to persuade a company, an airline at the time called DAE, to recruit me as a mechanic. So that was the real start in aviation for me, and DAE was a wonderful place to cut your teeth and start your skill set in aviation. It also gave me a great opportunity to gain some qualifications. I didn't realize till I was there, but aviation opens doors maybe for late starters, people who don't do so well academically at the first attempt, and aircraft licenses are available to you. And I took full advantage of everything that aviation could offer me. Working in hangars, working in line maintenance, taking licenses, volunteers to start an engine bay. So signing up for that, people questioning, why would you want to work in an engine bay? You know, it's a narrow channel. But that, as I reflect back, that was the catalyst for all of the opportunities I've been given. And it was starting to specialize on engines in an engine bay that several years later led to me dealing with leases. And so starting to see lease agreements as you're looking at these engines, what you need to do to them, who they belong to, interacting with lessors, engine lessors initially. And that was it. That was a great start for me to understand this thing called aircraft leasing. So you fast forward from there, and in that journey, DAE regrettably sold for £1 to British Airways. So an airline in distress, and that's it. That's a continuing theme that we all witness on a day-to-day basis, regrettably. But to the rescue came a company called FLS, who also had a footprint in Donal's territory in Dublin. They took on the Lingus maintenance facility as they took on a large maintenance facility in Manchester. So yeah, I worked with DAE. Skipped out of FLS, joined an airline called Air Tours. That airline called Air Tours started life with 7 MD-83s and finished with a wide-body, narrow-body fleet of modern aircraft. Renamed itself as My Travel, merged with another airline called Thomas Cook. And in amongst all this came opportunities for me to progress through management positions, from being an engine specialist. Then the airline finds itself in a tight corner, redelivering aircraft. This situation, we had aircraft on lease, but we didn't understand how we gave them back. And that was painful. That was a very painful experience. which a couple of senior managers didn't do so well at. And I kept putting my hand up saying, I'd like to try that. Let me do that job. And that was another, real catalyst for the opportunities that came my way. How the 16-year-old fitter and turner retired from aviation for the first time in June 2021 as the CTO of what at the time was the second largest leasing company in the world, Avolon. So it's a journey, Alok. I could go into much more detail on, but I think to give you the start to finish, the finish was 10 years with Avolon. I went through the door at Avolon probably about 18 months after the company had been started, 30-something people. I think I was employee number 34. I was technical person number 2 to join. And then when I left there in June 2021, there were 52 people in the technical team. And through good fortune, and I would suggest maybe a lot of hard work, I was the leader of that technical team. And it was a fantastic experience. And it brought me into Dublin, where you do meet the leasing community. We all know the leasing community. Yeah, it's based in many corners of the globe, but the real headquarters, as I look at it, is Dublin, Ireland, and it's a fabulous place. It's got a hell of a vibe, and it's got a multitude of talented people who specialise in leasing. But yeah, so started in a little workshop in the back end of Birkenhead, down by the docks, and finished in the 7-star hotel-like office block in Bullsbridge number 1 with Avolon, and I thought I was out. I retired in June 2021. Got sucked back in probably about 7 months later, initially to do some expert witness work. And somebody you know very well, Alok, a gentleman called Alok Anand, kept chipping away at me as well and saying, if you want to give a little bit of help, if you'd like to give a little bit of support and get a little bit involved. So that's what I do. I try to help Acumen along the way, but nothing too onerous. I'm probably the person who has the easiest ride in Acumen. I'm a pseudo 1 day a week guy. Yeah, but that's it in a nutshell.
I must thank you once more for that time, and full disclosure for our audience also, both Donal Lowry and Ian Clark are directors, members of Acumen Aviation's board, for which I'm very grateful, because they both play a key role in guiding the board, and as well as providing me and the company a lot of guidance with their experience, because as a company like ours need that support. So thank you again, gentlemen, for that. You both have crossed paths many years back, right?
Oh, I could. We could get into the rough and tumble now, Alok.
Yeah. But I actually met Donal in 2011. It was in RDS in Dublin during the Air Finance conference. Those days there was only Air Finance General Conference, which used to happen, no airline economics.
Yeah,
and
I still have my notes from that meeting.
I very much doubt it, because Donal was the CTO of ORIX, and I was a puppy or a babe in the woods, so to speak, in that conference, giving my cards, trying to get some business, and Donal royally ignored me. I always tell him he royally ignored me. He never agrees. But I'll let you tell your version, Donal. Don't worry. But then Ian, I think we met in 2015-16 when you were looking at your exposure in the India region for Avolon.
Yeah, I think it's a bit earlier than that.
That's
I think it was
maybe
a little bit early. I'd say it was probably about 2013.
2014.
Yeah.
13, 14. Yeah, a bit earlier, right? Yes. So it's interesting how things go, and I must confess, I never thought when I met both of you separately, and that we'll all be working together and we'll all be doing what we are doing now, in different forms. And when did you guys meet first? I know there is a very interesting story behind it. That's why I'm asking.
Well, I just want to clear it up here. I do recall meeting you in February 2011, and you were handing out business cards like confetti.
You got the date wrong. It was January. See?
No, I have the notes from when I took your card. I was impressed, but I didn't tell you I was impressed. But I put a note on my diary saying I met you last night, and it worth following up and pursuing some business interest with you. So I don't think I ignored you. I still have the diary entry, and I must copy it and send it to you.
Okay, when you send it to me, I'll believe you, Donal.
I think it was February.
Yeah, maybe the meeting started in January and Alok kept talking till February. Hey,
I I have that habit. That's possible.
Yeah. I can enter the fray here. Please forgive me, David Power and all those other people, Matthew Minahan, and these are the stalwarts of ORIX. But ORIX were a tough leasing organisation. Donal, in fairness, was fair. He was the voice of reason. But they were in my early encounters, they were old school, and they knew they had the advantage over the airlines. They knew we were green, naive, ill-prepared, and it was maybe an old-fashioned way, but they didn't give you a lot of help or a lot of guidance. They weren't totally outright rude or mean, but as I reflect, this was driven from HQ, and it was driven by people like Matthew, God bless him, who was a wonderful soul, no longer with us, but he was tough and he wanted the money for his organization. So ORIX and quite a few leasing companies like ORIX, that was a rude awakening for the airlines and for people like me, and the delays involved and being reminded to go back and look at your lease and what this entails. And probably 80% of the time, I'd say they were absolutely right. There was a huge learning curve for us in the airline, and 20% of the time they probably could have been a little bit more helpful, but they had masters to report to and to obey. But I do recall as that relationship matured, I recall one journey to the ORIX offices. And I was sent there on a mission by the airline to redeliver the aircraft, but we were minus one engine, so we had an aircraft in theory with only one engine that we could redeliver. So we needed a substitute engine, and this was because of a problem with an engine called the V25A1, and these things blew up. We think we have problems today with new technology, but the compressor section had its issues in the day. There were a lot of problems going on with the A1. And so we'd lost an engine. It was beyond repair. And so, but the mission I was sent on was, okay, go and persuade these guys. These are the suitable alternative engines. Anyway, I failed. I went to their offices and I came back with a 2-year lease extension. And that was the best we could get. They were hard as nails. They wouldn't accept the engine as a suitable alternative. And but having said that, Donal would be a voice of reason. We mentioned Ender Swan. He would be a tech rep in our hangar. He's somebody I poached and recruited years later when I came to Dublin, so he couldn't have been that bad. But it was a school of hard knocks. Early days meeting the lessors, and but you met lots of people along the way. There was only one guy for a period of time who I considered to be a friend, and that was a guy representing a leasing company called Debis, and that was Joe Gleason. And he was softer. He had a bigger heart than the rest. But equally, we had to learn fast. So if you could learn from your mistakes, you could survive, and you could improve, and that's what we had to do. But ORIX were tough taskmasters, but it predated Donal as well. There was Mark Carver in the mix, Paul Watkins in the mix, and we really had to learn quickly to keep in step with these people and to eventually return and redeliver aircraft, on time, on budget, and we did. We got there in the end, but it was a tough old journey. But the airlines are much smarter today than I was in the airlines I worked for in those earlier days. And let Donal, he's earned a right of reply there.
No, I understand exactly what Ian is saying, but at that time, airlines, at the front end of a lease, there was not really a technical involvement, I believe. It was mainly commercial people and financial people who were involved in negotiating the lease. So the return conditions, if there had been technical involvement at the time, the return conditions wouldn't have been as written. So at the back end of the lease, then these issues raised their head. It was fine during the lease term, everything went fine, aircraft flying away. But at the back end, then there was return conditions that were difficult to meet, and they didn't reflect the utilization of the aircraft in the interim period, like the shop visits, for example, and level of work on engines, etc., and landing gears. So had there been everybody, as Ian alluded to, airlines got more smarter. So at the front end of a lease, they're involved in the delivery conditions and the return conditions. So to smooth the path at the back end of the lease.
Okay, Donal, I just want to build on that thought a little bit, just to ask something. So, I mean, you're right. Obviously, the airlines became smarter in the sense, and that's a good thing, as you're saying. The everyone who's in that process should know their job, and because ultimately, a lessor's aim is to protect the asset value, and it should be in the interest of the airlines also. Obviously, it's their obligation. Not to forget, it's their contractual obligation. So, having said that, to maybe take a little example, uh, I I have also noticed that that the role or the approach of lessors has also evolved, which I again feel maybe a better way to say is that lessors have also learned, right? Because maybe 15, 20 years back for lessors also, it was comparatively a new territory compared to what it is today. So when you were the doing the same job, as an example, in ORIX, and then you did the same job or same role, similar role in DAE, as you mentioned, did you find any differences in how your role has evolved?
Well, the model is the same. No matter which leasing company you work for, the model that you're working to is more or less the same. How you deal with the customer may be slightly different. You might be looking at region, long term, short term, adjusting the lease agreement to reflect what the status of the aircraft will be at the back end, and build it into the lease rate, for example, or take compensation at the back end. So I don't know many leasing companies. I work for a few, but the models are more or less the same, with adjustments for what I said.
Right. Let's take that question to Ian for a minute. I'm hoping to draw a little contrast here. Did you find when you joined Avalon, you mentioned you were the second person in technical. Do you think the approach Avalon had to the business, especially to your area, do you think there was any contrast in the approach of a legacy lessor? And this follow up question to that could be, was that a conscious, just first of all, assuming there was, then was that a conscious decision, or did it just happen?
Yeah, I think key to the answers here, Alok, is Avolon was a brand new out the box leasing company, so we had a very clean start. So I think Donal's absolutely correct. The model is the same. The lessor model is the same wherever you go, but then the culture and behavior can be and is, or definitely used to be, significantly different. Because I maybe went a bit hard on Donal before and ORIX, but there were, and then I put a halo over Joe Gleason at Debis. But there were different approaches from different people. So the difference at Avolon is, ahead of me, Avolon recruited a guy that we all know called Lucas Mullen, and Lucas again had worked predominantly in the airlines. He spent time with the MRO, and I think Lucas being the first guy through the door, and then myself joining him at Avolon, I was fascinated to meet the risk management team of the lessor. I found this it's something I just hadn't thought long enough, hard enough to understand that, of course, a lessor would really, monitor risk. But I think our airline backgrounds and the decade or more that we'd had working the other side of the table with lessors, trying to redeliver aircraft, trying to negotiate contracts, it maybe gave us a little bit more vision, only through that experience of what the true risks were, and also how is the airline going to feel? How's the lessee, the customer, going to feel about some of these approaches? So, my nature and the history of me as a manager is I've been told off by, various people for being too kind, too nice. It's and you tell me I give people too much time. It's I don't move on quick enough. So, but I think Lucas is much nicer than I am. I probably look like I probably look like bad cop next to Lucas, but I'm too soft and I'm too kind. So yeah, we would listen to requests. We were probably very accommodating, but also we were a new lessor, and we wanted to gain friends in the community of lessees and customers. So it was a perfect role for me. It was a perfect role for Lucas Mullen. That we tended to know quite intimately a lot of the community of the airline technical personnel for airline reasons, not particularly focused from a lessor point of view. So I would say our approach, we drove the culture. Obviously, the culture was driven by Donal Slattery, top down. But the technical culture, as we grew a technical team that started with 1-2 people and developed into 52, we were able to build that culture and maybe take the approach that I always preferred in the end as we entered into discussions or problematic issues with lessees, and maybe go that little extra mile to help them through it. And that goes all the way back to the mention I gave earlier that, the lessors were probably right 80% of the time, I think I said earlier, but they could have helped me a bit more 20% of the time. Well, I think, and again, it's because I give people time, and this, Alok, I would be sitting in the office there in Ballsbridge till 9-10 p.m. in the evening, across the time zones, but I would give people time. If they had an issue, I would try to work through it with them, particularly a customer, because our sales team works so hard to secure the customer, and a technical team can blow that relationship up in no time at all through a clumsy decision that maybe we had some flexibility and we could have been more accommodating. So, and this is difficult to say because there are so many great people in the industry who were in similar roles to me, and one of them is the third member of our cast here. Donal had a sympathetic ear, but he maybe didn't have quite as accommodating, sympathetic bosses as I had, in Avolon. And again, that was Avolon's youth and its endeavor to build the customer base and retain the customer base. So I think it was a little bit different, and it's only small margins here, but the word difference is, but also I came from a different background. So, and I was given a blank piece of paper to build out the asset management team and to help, drive the culture. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, it does very well, and thanks for explaining that, because it's interesting to get a little contrast on how this this key role in the business has evolved. As you rightly said, the role is not just technical; it's about risk assessment, risk management, customer relationship. It all comes into the mix. Things evolve, businesses evolve, industries go through cycles, like. Fortunately for me, through Donald's career journey, if I may say so, in aviation leasing, I've been lucky enough to be in touch with him throughout that in some form or other. And every now and then I have been, I would again say, fortunate enough to to continue to work with him. And yes, there, and I can tell you, I have had some tough negotiations. Donald's favorite phrase, I still remember that when I used to submit a proposal, Alok, my favorite phrase is, you remember, Donald, 50% or free? We used to start the negotiation at that point. But I learned a lot and I understand the I understand the interest here of protecting one's business also. I personally learned a lot. I've always said this to Donald, and I've learned negotiation from you, whatever little I've learned.
No, my favorite acronym was FOC. But that was only just to start off with a bit of a, what would I say, light or a joke, right?
Of course, of course.
It got the ball rolling, and we got into it. No, we never fell out, which is good. And we had, we were involved in quite a few projects, especially down in the Middle East when I worked for Dubai Aerospace. And we had some challenges there.
I can give you an FOC, Donal. I can give you my best FOC that I gave you, and it was an A320 going to Australia. First A320 V25 power to go to Australia, ORIX machine, and we were redelivering it. And when it got there, I think the regulator was quite tough on the guys, so we were off the hook. This was me, and I think with my Thomas Cook hat on, and Swan had taken redelivery of the aircraft, and then the people at the other end, and there was a lovely guy, Andrew somebody, the Aussie guy, the Aussie rep. But they had an issue with proving paint thickness. There was a procedure to repaint the freight holds, make them look pretty, the gull liners, and put the markings on. And the regulator drew a line and wouldn't accept the aircraft. So there was a debate about, we need people to go and prove that the modification is an okay modification and performed, and then the paint thickness. So FOC for me, Alok, was supporting after we'd signed redelivery, sending two guys on my dollar from Manchester to Australia for the best part of 9 or 10 days, teaching some people how to measure paint thickness and read a modification in Australia. And that was FOC. And I didn't mind doing that, because through that redelivery with Donal in the background and the Swan on site, they definitely moved from the 80% of cooperation into the high 90s. And then the fact they ended up in a corner with this issue, and then the fact that it was probably very hard to get a PO written, probably more, it would have taken more time than either Donal or I could have applied. So that was FOC, and he definitely got that one free of charge. Yeah. So sorry, but you did like FOC.
No.
But I like giving you that one.
No, thanks. But that was I remember that now. You brought back the good and bad memories from that time. And not only were the Australian authorities measuring or checking the cargo hold panels, they also wanted to check the thickness of the paint in the cockpit panels. They were so ridiculous. They didn't want the aircraft, because of the engine type, that the V2500 A1s weren't on the Australian register prior to this aircraft. So they dug in, and the aircraft was embarrassingly on the ground for a long time after arriving there. And we also had to send the guy down.
Yeah, but I didn't have to send the guy down, though, Donal. I just did it because I liked you. No, I like the way the guys had conducted themselves through that redelivery. But yeah, it's just I'm not I'm trying to be humorous here, but it's a fact. You know what I mean? You just think,
I remember.
You do things above and beyond, because relationships get stronger and stronger, and relationships were reaching a good place at that time between myself heading up the leasing at the airline and the ORIX team. Yeah, it was good. Happy days.
See, gentlemen, as far as the Australians are concerned, feel free to say any number of bad things right now. They've just taken the World Cup from under our nose 2 days back. So I welcome you to tell me anything bad about them at this stage. So I think their defense minister and all are right now in India. They're friends with Indians, but they still took our cup. So anyway, what you have told me right now, both of you, how the CTO role has evolved a bit from what a legacy leasing company used to do. Uh, there is a question in my head. I don't know if maybe one of you want to touch upon that, since you both have essentially and just one thing I want to underline in your career journey is what you mentioned. One thing which always amazes me about both Ireland and United Kingdom is the quality and the breadth of aviation experience which these two countries have produced is actually exemplary. A lot of people I work with right now are from these two regions, and it's great because we learn from them a lot, and it's actually great. I think their impact has been very global, also, obviously for obvious reasons. Professionals from these two regions are working all around the world, making an impact, but especially in aviation. So I've always wondered why that has been the case, how that ecosystem has been enabled, and uh, perhaps this is another attempt just to learn that. But on the overall technical role, like you both have evolved from airline slash MRO side to aircraft leasing. On the two fronts, one example which comes on top of my head is, like Ian, you mentioned the team size you had in Avalon when you left was close to 52. If I recall rightly what you said. And Donald, when you moved on, for example, from ORIX Aviation, the technical team, I'm sure it was a small size, but do you remember a number? What was it? 25, 20, 30?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't that size. I think it was about 10 or 11, but the asset management per se was a little separate unit. Whereas nowadays, asset management and technical management are more or less the same team. But at that time, asset management were number crunching and looking after the lease rentals and the maintenance reserves, etc., etc. So there was an attempt to merge the two departments when I was there, but it didn't happen. So the core engine, the core technical team was, I think, about 10 or 11.
Did you notice or any key differences? The technical asset management piece, or the head of technical department of technical asset management, how is that, in your opinion, different than what you were doing in an airline slash MRO life?
I'll try to answer, but an airline sells seats, an MRO sells man hours, and a leasing company leases aircraft or manages aircraft, lease management of aircraft. But in the airline, the role is much more technical. You delve deeper. For example, I was trying to remember my title. I was in the engineering department at the time, in charge of maintenance programs and schedules. And at that time, you had to have very deep knowledge of ADs, service bulletins, campaigns, manufacturers' campaigns, implementation dates, liaise with planning and engineering, structures, etc. It was very technical. Then when you move to a leasing company, it's not as technical unless there's an issue. You don't have to delve down into the service bulletin level unless there's a problem. So you let the airline, what they say, have quiet enjoyment during the lease period. But of course, you monitor, or you do your midterm inspections or whatever is allowed for the lease. So you don't really dig down or drill down as deep with a leasing company. But you need to be aware of what's the major technical issues may be. Now, I had a baptism of fire when I joined the leasing company, ORIX, because my predecessor had left the building. And my handover was on phone calls and emails. And it was difficult to pick it up. And one challenging issue was the problems that Ian alluded to was at V2500 A1. That created big problems for operators, leasing companies, and of course Pratt & Whitney, and probably cost them dearly. and it went on for years. Anyway, we overcame it eventually, but it wasn't a good experience.
Kind of deja vu today. We will come upon that topic
Yeah,
again.
yeah.
It
It
is
looks like
related
it.
to, yeah. So uh, on the same point, Ian, do you have any insights from your experience to share with us?
Yeah, it's significantly different. I think there's pressure in both roles. I think in a senior management role, in a CTO or head of technical role, airline or lessor, there are pressures, but the pressures are different. I think the intensity of those pressures in the airline role are higher when those folks are dealing with true AOG. So an aircraft in distress that should be carrying passengers and it's unserviceable, and the level of intensity associated to rectifying those situations, as quickly as possible. So I think the pressures are much more. For me, in management roles in the MRO environments, there's union pressures. Those guys can be tough. They can be stubborn. And yeah, I've maintained today they don't know how much management tries to help them, as opposed to they think you're trying to hold back from them. Because the airline world as well, the margins, the profit margins are tight. It's predominantly a volume business with small margins, and if things go wrong, if you have a bit of a crisis beyond your own control, it can be so damaging so quickly. Governments, when I look at the UK government particularly, focus on them. They don't appreciate what they've got, so it's an easy target for levies, for additional passenger duties and taxes. So I would say, if I had to put my cards on the table, it's tougher to be the airline, but that doesn't mean it's easy to be the lessor. The lessor, it's not an easy role because it's global. It's so diverse, and that's to disperse your risk and your exposure. So that's part of the model, and it makes absolute sense. It's fascinating to go a little bit deeper for those that don't understand this on that. That's probably for another day. But the global model. So the pressures exist in both, but I think the pressures in a management role are more intense with the airline. And yeah, there's so many things that can go wrong. And Donal mentions just one AD, one airworthiness directive can just change the direction of everything you're trying to work towards. But yeah, in my final days at the airline, before jumping ship and coming into the leasing community, it was so tough. It's just the industry was under so much pressure, and it's all price pressure, and it's a really challenging environment. And you do, as senior managers, you look at, in those days there was probably about 350 mechanics and engineers who you want them to survive, and regrettably, when I look back now, I'd say, yeah, I'd left by 7 or 8 or more years, but that airline, that MRO, they went under. It's they go, and so it's a really tough environment, and there's always there's additional pressures, I think, for the airline personnel and for airlines to make a profit and to sustain. And so that's where it blends in then, as to, you've got to help them. If you're the lessor, you want to help. You want the airlines to be there so that you've got the customers. So it's a balance, but you're not a charity. You're your own business, and you've got to be a viable commercial proposition as a business. But there's a balance in that, and that goes into risk management as well. You don't want to punish an airline, even if they've made bad choices, bad decisions. You want to make sure that you're not going to punish yourself by punishing them. So that it's a fine balance. It really is. But the airline guys do get my sympathy, because I think that's the toughest environment is the airline MRO environment.
All right, that's all interesting. Donald, you mentioned about V2500 Pratt, and it's obviously tempting for me to move on to the topic of the day, GTFs. Again, Pratt is in the picture. V2500 you have mentioned. Uh, uh, in your experience, and I know I'm very keen to then hear Ian's thoughts also. But in your experience, how do you see? Do you see any similarities, and what V2500 A1 which you have mentioned about, and now GTF number one? Maybe we start with that, and then we go into a bit more detail on this.
I think that the PW1100 GTF engine is a much bigger problem than the V2500 engine some 15 years ago. At least the V2500 didn't drive as many engines off wing. It did reduce some of the intervals, but it didn't drive them all off wing. But this current problem with the GTF is going to drive 500 and 600 engines off the wing, which has a huge effect on airlines who are revising the schedules while the aircraft are on the ground and engines are in the shop. Now, there's numbers being bandied about. Like I saw an update a few months ago in September from Pratt & Whitney, where there's 400 to 500 engine changes forecasted between now and 2026. And they're talking about an balance sheet cost of 1.5, 2 or 3 billion. But this is a serious issue. And I notice, strangely, that Pratt & Whitney doesn't be referred to as much now. It's called RTX, the parent company. I don't know the reason for that, but they seem to be using the parent company in communications. So I don't know if there's a message there or not, but engines they're only going to start their shop visits now, so it'll be interesting to see what the turnaround time will be and the eventual cost, because as you know, when you open an engine, you're going to find something else. And then if it comes out of the shop with reduced life limits on some of the LLPs, that's also has a huge effect on airlines. And Pratt, if you're to take distance pools off at 6,000-7,000 cycles, when it should be built for 20,000 cycles. So it's going to be a huge problem, I think. I even heard of repeat intervals on some of the checks on it at 2,800 to 3,800 cycles. So I don't know where this is going to go, but it's certainly going to impact big on the industry.
Right. Okay, let's hear a little bit from Ian on this. Ian, you have an engine background too, obviously, as you've explained through your career journey. So I'll be very interested to know your thoughts, but maybe a little more perspective also on the technical side of this whole issue.
It is a lot. It's I'd forgotten about to some degree about the V25, the IAE, but I had a fabulous time working with IAE, which was one of the 4 remaining of the 5 partners. Is Pratt & Whitney, but they have the whole shebang now. Hey, with the GTF, this problem with the V25, that was a problem. And I worked closely. I was a power plant engineer on the engine type. So I did about 4 years solid working with A1 engines, V2500 A1, the predecessor to the A5. And that was fascinating, and it was an education in itself for me to get to know the engine people to the next level of detail and relationship, and how they support their way through difficult times, how they support airlines. And it was very problematic, the A1 situation and the HPC4 failures. But Donal is absolutely right. It was a small sideshow in comparison to what we appear to be facing up to with the GTF. But they worked through it really well. Those that recall it, it was very similar in hot section distress and hardware disruption, and engines needing to go to shop. But the worst point for the airline was the under the cowl activity. Airlines talked about, under the cowl disruption. So I think we've all dispatched aircraft. We've all worked in line maintenance, the three of us, and we know an aircraft when it's been through its maintenance interval, its A check, C check, whatever it may be. You don't expect to open the cowlings. In theory, you don't open the cowlings. You open a little hatch and you pour a bit of oil in, maybe. But you're meant to be flying that aircraft, and it's giving you good service, and engineers are turning it around really quickly. 1 hour, 2 hour turnarounds, and it goes again, and utilization goes up. Whereas I try to put myself in today's world with the new technology and the Pratt & Whitney problem, but it's not just Pratt & Whitney. There's other new tech engines that are having their issues. And that under the cowl disruption of engine changes and more engine changes is horrendous. I really do think that's a huge burden for the airlines. It's a huge burden for Pratt & Whitney, but they'll recognise they have to step up and resolve that and help the airlines, and I'm sure they'll do their absolute damnedest to do that. But the problems are just, they escalate. When we had to compare, when we had the V2500A1 issues, you could you would have an ad hoc engine change, you would have a poor time on wing, but you would take an engine to the engine shop, and typically in the era that I was working through with the A1, that turnaround time on that engine would be between 65 and 70 days. You would get that engine back. So, Donal's mentioned the quantity of engines involved here on the GTS side of things, but the other bit that I'm picking up is the engine goes to shop. It's going to go to shop for 200 or possibly 300 days because of today's supply chain issues, MRO slot availability. There isn't the capacity to induct all these engines. I think we hear different numbers of involvement here, but I hear the bits I'm picking up. I'm hearing that there's a potentially 3,000 affected engines. There's a peak in the first half of next year of 650 engines needing to go to shop, that will then tail off to 300 engines for the remainder of the year, and 300 for the year after. But the scale of that, and the fact that those engines need to go to shop and will be lost to the airline for 200-300 days. So the strain on spare engines and keeping aircraft flying is I would think at risk of being beyond control. So, in my head, you're going to have donor aircraft parked, and the two engines will come off a donor aircraft to try and maintain a proportion of the fleet that can remain in service. So it's a huge problem that is going to get an awful lot of focus. But I think we've seen there are other engine types as well. The competitor's engine has some issues. The LEAP, we're aware of that. They seem to be under better control. We know that the Trent 1000 had significant issues, and we watched with sadness as Rolls-Royce and airlines like Norwegian tried to wrestle their way through that. But there just seems to be so many challenges on the new tech engine side of things, which we know why these engines have been brought to market. We know the green or the ESG crusades and the view people have on our industry and how they want us to reduce emissions. But it's questionable now. Have we gone to such a fine margin, a pinch point here with these technologies? But Pratt and Whitney are resourceful. IAE found a way through a very challenging campaign and introduced a set of modifications that resolved the A1 and turned it into an okay engine. That was the Phoenix modifications. If those out there that remember it, you used to get a nice big sticker on your engine if you had the best of the HPT seals, the best of the combustors, and that's all very similar. There's combustor issues, but the LLP issues that they're experiencing now takes this problem it's its greater depths. But I'm sure that they'll be resourceful to work through it. But it's going to be painful for all stakeholders in this. But the numbers are staggering. The numbers involved. If it's 3,000 engines potentially affected, 650 engines have to come off wing. Q1, Q2, 2024, 200, 300 days turnaround time. It was probably quite wise of me to get away from a power plant desk and retire and just go into an advisory role on a board, because today you'd need youth. You'd need youth and endeavour to crack on and get through all that. But that's what the industry brings. It's and equally, when the A1 was such a big problem, I loved every minute of it. Not because it was a problem, it consumed me. It gave me energy, and it gave you a purpose to resolve issues. And the industry is excellent for doing that. We thrive in a crisis. So there's definitely there's a level of crisis here with this issue, but there's normally people out there up for the challenge, and they'll find a way through this, but not without some pain, and not without some regrettably probably some bad PR against the asset types and the engine combinations for a period to come. And then it's what is the solution? The solution for the A1 was to replace it with an alternative engine, the A5, and they were not interchangeable. So that would be, and was before I departed from the leasing community, that would be the bone that I was chewing on and trying to persuade Pratt Whitney not to go down is, don't isolate the community of today's GTFs with the next version of it becoming an A5. To me, that interchangeability and the longevity of those engines, once they've got the best combustors, the best LLPs, and all these issues resolved, that community is a community of one, and not a split community of A1, A5.
Right, but if I'm not wrong, kind of that is what is happening now, right? There's a new next version under development, possibly.
But I've heard Alok. Yeah, there's at one point it was going to have a slightly different name and an advantage or something. But yeah, and I hope that's the case. But that was the case. That was the dialogue with the A1 and the A5. They were going to be fully interchangeable. There was going to be commonality of all, nacelles, etc. And that wasn't the end result. It didn't turn out that way. And so, by design, I hope you're right. And this is probably my lack of involvement in today's world. I'm probably not close enough to it, but I would just hope that doesn't become a repeat pattern. And I think the intention is to just improve the engine that we have today. But I'm not sure. I'd need to talk to people who are closer to the topic, and I will, with the opportunity given. I'll monitor it closely.
Right. So Donald, let me ask you something on what on the background of what you mentioned and then now Ian has explained. You also mentioned that there is a repeat inspection requirement. I believe you mentioned 2800 or 3000 cycles or hours, I believe. I recall that there is an event I attended a few weeks back where an airline representative actually asked the question in the group that when they are returning the airplanes, the engines, there is a clause that there should be no repeat inspection requirements on the assets. So the question which that gentleman asked, and as you can imagine, we took a side road to that in the discussion that time. But the question was, how will that requirement be satisfied when that airline which they were representing is returning the airplanes with these engine types? So if you are the lessor, and if your lessee comes to you with this problem, what's the solution and offer?
It's a good question, and then it's going to have to be negotiated between the lessee and the operator. But if it's mandated to check an engine, the HPT disk at this stage, what they're saying is it could be as low as 2.8 to 3.8 cycles. The airline can't clean the sheet and hand it back to you, so you're going to have to start talking with the lessor and or the manufacturer. So maybe whatever guarantees are there from the manufacturer will be passed on to the lessor, and the costs of the inspections might be subject for negotiation between the lessee and the lessor. I have seen this before on other technical issues, and they were resolved because you can't take the engine. It would be unreasonable to demand a new engine to replace an engine that has a repeat inspection interval driven by the manufacturer for safety reasons. But in the past, there may be compensation for the manpower, which shouldn't be too much if it's a boroscope. And if it forces a removal, then that's a different issue. So the lessor will want to be protected, or the next operator, if there's a forced removal.
Okay, I'm still wondering about that because, like, Ian, maybe you want to chip in there. I'm just wondering, like, even if there is a repeat inspection requirement, and as Donald has mentioned, it is mandated by the OEM or the ADs in this case, the current lessee can very well make a case that it is none of their fault, and the future inspection exposure or boroscope requirements should not be at their cost. I'm just wondering, isn't that a fair case to make, or frankly, I'm just trying to understand this. And Ian, if maybe you can give your thoughts too as well on this.
I think situations like this, Alok, it's almost a problem without an answer unless you are a stakeholder in that specific situation. And what tends to happen in really challenging situations like that is, I would say there needs to be, and the way through it would be a tripartite agreement with the OEM and the lessor and the lessee or the future lessee. But it's a very interesting and a very real conundrum that you put out there for people to consider, and I'm sure it's real, it's live, it's active. But I think today's world of lessors, the pressures that the OEMs are under, that they'll undoubtedly they'll find a solution. But a lot of these things are achieved behind closed doors. Really, it's a private matter to those involved. I think the greater concern for me is the onward marketing of these assets as it comes to the end of a lease. And if there are these problems and these repeat inspections, it reduces the attractiveness of the asset class as you try to remarket it. So I think that's the bigger problem here. Finding a way through it, I don't think you'd have to be personally involved to understand how that's going to happen. But normally we find solutions. You know, we're technical people, and we normally always quote, you know, we deal in solutions. People throw us problems, and we deal in solutions. But it's a difficult one. And once upon a time, there would be a stubborn nature. You know, a decade ago and a decade and a half ago, you couldn't redeliver an engine with a repeat inspection. You know, so people will still have that memory but those issues could normally be resolved in those previous cases, in those previous decades. That normally was an unfortunate situation, something discovered on a redelivery borescope that could be remedied. You could go back to the shop, you could take out a blade, you could do something to remove that out of interval inspection. This situation today is different. So it will take different creative methods, underwriting the risk, and ultimately I think all roads for these kind of situations at the moment lead back to the OEM. But then what the lessors and the lessees have to do is document that so that all parties are comfortable. And they are grandmasters at documenting this stuff, but it's complicated. It can be quite complicated, and there's various nuances depending on who you are in that. Which stakeholder are you? You know, are you the redelivering lessee? Are you the potential next lessee? But the lessor normally wants to be the guy in the middle who just passes it from one lessee to the next. But it's more complicated than that, I would imagine, at the moment. But they'll find a way through it, though, I'm sure.
Yeah. But it's an interesting thing to watch and going ahead and seeing how this will happen. And by the way,
I'd love to meet the guy who has the complete answer. I'd like to hear the complete answer, because I think it's the problem without a clearly defined answer or solution at the moment. But I would think there's the will and the wherewithal in the community to find a way through those problems. And it differs from the question I think you were initially asked is on the boilerplate lease of I cannot accept an engine back with a repeat inspection. And we all understand that. But really those were problems that could be remedied. These issues at the moment can't be remedied, or if they can be remedied, maybe you are looking at putting a new LLP in or whatever it might be. But I think it's different thinking caps on to find a way through some of today's issues for that kind of lease language.
We're going to know more in the coming weeks when some service bulletins that are being written at the moment and what they're going to say. But there's talk about the disk life being reduced to 5,000 to 7,000 cycles, which is going to create more panic. And if you try to move an asset with a 5,000 or 7,000 disk limit on it instead of 20,000, the manufacturer is going to have to get involved in a tripartite agreement. But otherwise, nobody they won't take the SR won't be able to move the asset unless he gets comfort from the manufacturer.
True. The only thing I will say here is that the very fact that there is this anxiety from the airline side tells you something about the industry, right? That means they have had this kind of maybe informal discussions or possibly prior experience, good or bad, both. So it's an interesting problem to see how this is handled going forward.
Well, in the past, Alok, many years ago, and I don't remember the airline, but a small airline, two engine changes can bankrupt an airline. Two unscheduled engine changes can bankrupt an airline. So what's this going to do to some airlines if they don't get compensated? Not only will the engine have to be rectified, but they'll have to be compensated if the aircraft are on the ground for a long time. And then they have the cost of hiring. Apparently there's a lot of demand at the moment for short-haul aircraft. to step in while the engines are in the shop. You'll be paying twice. You'll be paying for the aircraft on the ground and for the leasing aircraft if you want to maintain some form of a schedule. I think there's 2 or 3 airlines at the moment now they're planning to park the aircraft long term by this problem and move engines and other costs, moving engines around to get them to shop visit.
Yeah. Donald, I remember a few years back you were also involved in a remarketing role based out of Singapore,
Yes,
right?
that's where I
So,
got my grey hairs.
yes.
It was great to go back to technical.
So, so how will you remarket an airplane today, which is fitted with these engines? What is the strategy, if you have to?
I'd have to think about that for about a minute.
I'm glad they asked you, Donal.
But
Yeah.
I tell you, I wouldn't be bringing a young fella with me. It's going to be very difficult. But again, it's going to be the same everywhere. So the problem will be in every jurisdiction. And as I said, it's going to be a tripartite agreement, because if there's an unscheduled removal, who's going to pay for it? I wouldn't like to be going into an airline, a hard-nosed airline, trying to market that engine. No, I'd be thrown out of the room.
I
Which it
think
have
it's
been.
yeah.
And have been.
I think as well, Alok, it's the engine OEMs. I don't think this is what they intended when they encroached on the lessor's space with total curves and total control, power by the hour arrangements, and they're much closer to the relationship side of things now than ever before. And that was their desire. They wanted to get in on the action. They wanted to get in and maybe get in the way of maintenance reserves and what have you. And it's really challenging because it's here, but they're in this negotiation with the lessor now, whether the lessor wants it or not. So, our previous existences of a decade and a half ago, or a couple of decades back, and what engines would achieve, whether that be driven by cycles or flight hours on wing. This is a total recalibration for the industry now. The predecessors to the LEAP achieving high 30,000 hours on 2-to-1s, 3-to-1s, whatever you. The disk stack, as Donal has highlighted here, the disk stack isn't going to be capable of the high time on wing. You go back to the A1s and the A5s, and they were compared as only achieving a less on wing time, and people were maybe disappointed with 10,000 hours on a 2-to-1, 3-to-1 ratio, or 12 or 15,000 hours. They were small numbers. That people have to recalibrate themselves, I think, now for this new technology. And they also have to recognize that the OEM has come very close to the negotiation and is potentially at the table or very close to the table with the lessor, or in the next room with the lessor, and then in the next room with the potential lessee. And so the lessor, I think, can't and won't be solving all those issues on his own. The OEM is very close to the fire here and to the problem zone. They wouldn't have wanted it to be the problem zone. Wouldn't we all wish that the technology had just been placed on wing and performed? And the LLPs, as they were originally described, whether it be 15 or 20,000 cycles, would be capable of that, but they're not. So there's one thing for sure here: in the short term, mechanics are going to get overtime aplenty, taking engines off, putting engines on. The freight forwarders and haulage companies are going to be moving engines here, there, and everywhere. And the industry is going to have to get used to these shorter intervals of of engines on wing. So the old world and the great people that I learned, my trade from, who would talk about avoidance of under the cowl disruption. And, once we only want to maintain an aircraft once on an A check or a C check, and then send it out and get the utilization up to 12, 14, 15 hours a day on an asset, there's going to be more disruption. And that's just a fact. And the engine OEMs particularly are going to be working very closer than ever before with the stakeholders for quite a time to come. It's just that change has occurred, but I think we work in the guys have to put different hats on as they go to the table for different negotiations. As they go to the CO negotiation, we all understand that that's the model. That works within the model. Donal mentioned the model at the very beginning, and the lessor's model works quite nicely with a CFM 56-5-7 or a V25A5 or a Trent 700, a CF 680. But with the new technology, you have to have a more diverse set of thinking apparatus and tools at your disposal, and probably the OEM working much closer with you as well, and these OEM agreements that wrap around the products now.
Yeah, not to forget, one of my earlier guests, when we discussed this topic, also educated me on the point of LLP coupons, which has come into play now. And it's funny, like when you said that the OEMs have got too close to it in the lesser space. It kind of reminds me. It's just the thought just came into my head. The famous quote from the movie Spider-Man: "With great power comes great responsibility," and I think that is what kind has happened. They have too much power has been concentrated in that sense, and then this responsibility is also. I think a lot of it is falling into their bucket now because of that, and things are becoming overcomplicated in that sense. Maybe, as you're saying, the earlier world was a bit simpler in contractual terms. Let's see how this plays out. It'll be interesting.
For example, I don't know how they're going to calculate or come to a dollar figure for maintenance reserves on engines on the LLPs.
Yes.
I don't know how they're going to do it. If your disc is supposed to be 20,000 from manufacturer, now it's suddenly going to become 5 or 6 or 7,000 cycles life. So the manufacturer will step up big time. But in the past, in the CF, I think it was a CF34, Pratt & Whitney stepped in, and while it was only built for 15,000 cycles with an on-wing escalation to 20,000. But in the interim, till the engine matured, they were compensating for the 5,000 cycles. Now it's a different story, compensating from 7,000 to 20,000 cycles. And then the costs, I've heard some huge numbers for discs and brakes. So discs and blades recently, which I didn't get time to check them, but we're talking serious numbers for a set of blades or discs, like 1.5 million.
Oh, interesting.
If it's correct.
Yeah, we'll find out. We'll find out eventually. So I actually just want to let you both. I hope you both have another 5 or 10 minutes to give me. You've given me close to 1.5 hours, so I really appreciate that.
Of course.
I wanted to ask.
I'm paid by the hour, Alex, so there's no problem.
Yeah, no problem. My favorite word is FOC, Donal. I've learned from the best.
It's after 9 o'clock now, so I'm not in overtime.
Yeah. I think a lot.
This is what I meant. This is what I meant, Ian, when I said difficult negotiations.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think a lot. We should try and lift the doom and gloom a little bit before we.
Yes.
If we're on the last 5 or 10 minutes.
Yes.
Because something I would like to touch on in a minute here is people and resource and such. But I think we should first lift the doom and gloom, because I think, me personally, and it wouldn't surprise me if you and Donal and people like us or of my vintage look at this situation at the moment, and you see this you see all these problems, but I'd love to be 10, 15 years, 20 years younger, and be working through these problems, because these minor crises that pop up, and I could bore everybody today about the A1 and the Phoenix kit and what have you. Well, this is just another iteration of that, but it's a bigger problem and it's got bigger dollar tickets on it. But for people in the industry who were at that power plant desk or working for the airline, it's a problem. Part of you hates it, but actually it drives you. It's fantastic education and opportunity and experience. And you do have to go and talk with the OEM and have meetings with the OEM. And you learn so much, and you meet more people, your network grows. And those working closest to these problems will be richer when they come out the other side of this. But to me, that's the other issue, and the bit we haven't got to, and I don't know whether you intend to, but it's resource in the industry and getting people into our industry. That's a little bugbear I've got that I'd like you to keep on the agenda before you turn the cameras and the microphones off.
Sure. I think we can get right into it. I don't mind doing that. I do have another question to ask, but that is again market related, maybe a little bit. But maybe we can get this into this topic. This is an interesting topic, and I do tend to touch upon it a little bit in every episode. In your role when you were running the show, who is the person you would look for? What is an ideal professional, in your opinion, you would look for, and what qualities that person would possess to grow, in your opinion?
Okay. I like hardworking people who get their head down and work in the role that they've accepted. And I think one of your previous guests said something, roll your sleeves up, get your head down, do the job you've been employed to do, and good things will happen. Good things will come your way. And that resonates with me. I align with that 100%. So you want good, hardworking young people to enter the industry, not to be ahead of their skis, as people sometimes say. Looking out for, well, what's next in my career progression. Not to be too annoying. Get your head down, and senior people look out for you, and they'll help you develop, and they'll help develop you and help you move forward. But my concern, Alok, is one stage before that. It's I'd be interested in yours and Donal's thoughts. Is our industry attractive enough? It's I thought I'd landed in Las Vegas for bright lights when I joined an airline, and obviously it's a dark, dirty hangar. It's oil, it's drags, but it was fabulous. As an engineer, it was just so dynamic, so exciting, lots of camaraderie, working with other people amongst your peer group. But I fear for the volume of aircraft that are coming into the industry. I think you're very well placed to answer this question in isolation when you look at the amount of aircraft that are destined for India, just India, not globally. And, can we back that up? As I'd read in the newsreels for India, airlines are stealing pilots off each other, 30, 40 at a time. And we know we don't just need pilots. We know we need traffic control. We know we need mechanics. We know we need ground handlers. We know we need hostesses. We need so many people who we need to join this industry that is growing. But I can't think of nephews and nieces I would talk to who would give it that much consideration. But I think it's a wonderful industry. I'd love to understand how clever marketeers could make it sexy again in the schools and the colleges, and see huge rafts of people come and join the industry. But I fear for it. I really do. Apprenticeship schemes and pilot cadetships and such like. I don't know. I think it's a problem. I don't have the answers to that one. I've sort of reversed the role a little bit here as well. I'm asking you the question, so apologies for that. But I do think at the highest level, it's given me a great career. I'm done, all in effect. I just do a bit of talking around the edges now, and a few bits and bobs with you, but who's going to come in and backfill, in scale to sustain this, and most of all, keep it safe and keep it well resourced? I don't know the answer to that.
So the thing is, see, there are a lot of things here in the question you put forward. You are right that, and this is in fact, I have addressed it in many of my previous episodes. I feel there are a lot of challenges in attracting new talent. I think the reason for that, one of the reasons which we have to identify, is the choice available to the young ones today, to the young professionals who are coming out of colleges. I think it was a different world. Like, if we take, for example, India or even any other country, I think it's pretty much on same lines. The scale may be different. The choices available are much more now. One has more choices, and some of those choices, compared to an aircraft engineer or an aircraft mechanic, do come across as more glamorous. So like I can pretty much bet, if the aviation is the only career choice, then every out of every four young one, three of them will choose to be a pilot than a mechanic. And that's not a coincidence. That is again the glamorization of the job. I'm I'm not saying being a pilot is anything wrong. I'm just saying that is a reality. That is how the young professionals look at job opportunity. That is one driving factor. The other issue is availability of choice. There is now OEM competition in the space. OEMs have been hiring from the same pool, much more than earlier. Then, of course, there is also the challenge of what income the young professionals are making. There is a lot of peer review comparison which goes on in that space, and there are other jobs in other industries which are maybe better paying also. If you take example of India only, see, India is a big growing aviation industry today, but it is also an industry where the airfares are not high enough to basically help a small airline sustain successfully. Still, it is still a challenge. A lot of our smaller airlines are dependent on government subsidies, what we call the Regional Connectivity Scheme in India, RCS, that helps them to sustain the routes they fly. So, and I can give you an actual example of just 2 days back. I was talking to an engineer who has joined a well-known MRO in India. This gentleman was just laid off, or just rather left Go First, because Go First is going through liquidation, as we know. So it left Go First, and he left Go First, and he was looking for a job. And he called me 2 days back saying, "Hey, I just wanted to touch base. I've joined here," and he joined a MRO, and he actually had job offers from Air India airline, and he had a job offer from Indigo also. So I was surprised from his choice. I think I would have made a different choice, but that's just me. I'm not in his place, so I can't judge. So I asked him. I said, "Why did you make this choice?" Straight answer, he said. He said that they were paying me better than the other two. It was a straight answer he gave me. And so there are a lot of things in talent retention. Now, for a business like ours, for example, we try to retain talent also, but the COVID has put a pressure on the margins. The customers are demanding lower prices. Obviously, their cash flow is impacted by the airline cash flow, and so on and so on. It's a totally separate topic, and I think you know a lot more about it already. But you're right, there is a challenge, and I think it is required to be addressed. However, on the positive side, a lot of initiatives are underway. I keep on hearing about training programs, apprenticeships. Like, I'm sure, like in Ireland itself, Donal, I'm sure you are aware. I hear a lot of MRO and even leasing side, fresh executives or new executives programs, graduate programs, and apprenticeship programs are still they're again getting popular. That's what I'm actually hearing.
Yeah, that is correct, but not at the rate it should be. And for example, I've heard that one of the IT companies in Ireland last year or early this year, they took the entire class of apprentices and gave them jobs from the Air Corps, the Army Air Corps. The entire class was headhunted by a major IT company. So how can you compete with that? As Ian said, that's probably, they consider that to be a more sexier job now than aircraft. They don't have to get their hands dirty.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah,
You know, so
that could be one of the reasons.
it's very difficult. And of course, a financial incentive. And younger people will move they won't look at the big picture. They'll look at the what's the financial benefit by moving, but without looking at the big picture, long term, etc. Stability. Will the company be around in 5 years' time? You know,
Yeah, yeah,
I often got,
that
I
is
get
another.
phone.
Yeah, you're right, and that is another thing which is different now. I'm not saying it is necessarily wrong. It's the way of thinking of the. So, in my parents' generation, the thinking was to get a very stable, secure job. That was the first criteria. In our generation, also there was. Our generation is interesting because we were growing up in an era where where we saw the pre-internet, pre-smartphones, pre-mobile phones, post-internet, post-mobile phone generation. We have seen both. We kind of at a cusp on that. So we have a mix. We know there is a value in stable jobs, but people like me, for example, have taken the risk to go on our own also. And then the next generation, I think, is maybe I would say more attuned to taking risks. They are, maybe I would say, more courageous, maybe is the right word. In that sense, they're willing to take that risk much more.
Yeah, they're like in the past, you could have one or two jobs in your career path. Now younger people, they have no problem moving every 2 or 3 years.
Yeah,
They're much more flexible in that sense.
and I think that is good and bad both. Yeah, you're right. So Ian, I hope I've managed to answer your question to a certain extent.
We also have a look. I think again, it's a bit like the other conundrum. We've got
Yeah.
one or two questions we don't have the answer to, but
Yeah.
it's thought provoking.
Yeah.
And regrettably as well, if at the end of my career or Donal's career, probably not that much we can do about it. So I personally would harbour a regret that I wish I'd tried a bit harder. In Dublin, I look at and I have huge respect for Conor McCarthy and what he does for creating apprenticeships. And then equally, I know, not similar to the Air Corps description Donal gave, the challenge of retaining those young people, really difficult. But here in the UK, not enough apprenticeships available for young people or cadetships or whatever. And yeah, I'm out of the spotlight now, so I can't really. My voice doesn't have that influence, but I hope there's people there who are thinking long and hard about how we backfill the industry, because we need such a diverse pool of talent. But also, hopefully, those that listen, it's a hell of a place to do your work. It's great fun. It's a great challenge. But yeah, I don't know how we tempt them in, or how the industry tempts them in the future, in the volumes that's going to be required. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is one of the reasons also why I started my podcast. And one thing I can tell you is there is still people out there, young professionals out there, who are very interested. And I am only saying this based on my own experience of how many people have reached out to me since I've started my podcast, who are interested to learn about the industry or enter the industry also. So one thing I can definitely tell you is there is However, I do understand on the technical side specifically, there continues to be, I think technical has possibly a bigger challenge in overall scheme of things than non-technical, because of the reasons which we have mentioned just now. That it's a tougher job, and people find the comfort of working in an office better, and maybe getting better paid for that also. Yeah, that continues to be a challenge. I agree. And okay, on a more positive note, we're coming to the end here, but maybe a couple of things more, and just the more positive note, I would, if I may request each of you to take a shot on giving me what do you think are the trends which are going to drive the industry over next few years. What do you think, in your opinion, given what you have seen? Pandemic has come and gone, thank God. I was talking to someone yesterday, and they said they feel this is once in a lifetime thing, won't be happening again. I hope they're right. But what do you think, if you have to make some prediction about the industry, where the industry is heading to, any major uh, prediction point you have in mind in your experience, which you maybe care to throw some light on? Maybe Donald, you can go first, and then maybe Ian, we can request you also.
Well, there's a lot of, we'll say, activities in motion at the moment. You've got the sustainable fuel initiative that's going on, and with zero carbon emissions by 2050. I don't know how that's going to evolve. You have hydrogen, universal hydrogen project going on, and you have electric hybrid aircraft being tested at the moment. Will they really develop? I don't know. Look at the order books, which is the good side is the order books from Dubai Air Show, for example, and since then, where there's major orders being placed. But I often wonder, where will the engineering, the technical people and pilots, where are they going to get them to keep these aircraft flying? And then you have this carbon offset that could break airlines as well. And I don't even understand. It's an industry in its own, has taken growing legs every week. So is it all theoretical, or is it? I don't know. But I'm hearing of this offsetting carbon taxes, etc., down the road. So the industry is going to change. I'm not so sure it's for the better. I hope it is. But there's regulations as well. Is going to impact the industry. It could become over-regulated.
And okay, Ian, do you want to please give us your insights as well? What do you see are the market trends?
Yeah, okay. I think Donald's touched on the green side of things, the emissions and what have you. So I think that's something that the industry it's a burden, but also it's an obligation. So I think there are there are positive and well-intentioned technologies being explored and developed, which won't go away. So the industry needs its image not to be tarnished with over polluting, and so embracing the new technologies or the new initiatives for fuel. I think that's inevitable. That's going to be there, and we're going to keep seeing that. I think that the trends, Alok, really, if you look at trends, there's always trends. So there's always peaks and troughs of activity. So COVID will live long in everybody's memory. So does SARS. So do volcanoes erupting and what have you. But I think the trend is that the industry keeps going. The industry is resilient. You focus on the leasing community, and some remarkably positive achievements, I think, from the lessors. You look at Russia, and if you follow the newsreels, and how lessors have navigated their way through some of those issues and assets that have been trapped, etc., and how to recover those assets or the value of those assets, I think is remarkable and commendable. So and then I was in it for the COVID period again. How organizations adapt, face challenges, and find solutions. again, remarkable, but actually it's a trend. The industry is resilient. People find a way through whatever challenges are thrown in front of them. So I think the industry will continue to grow. I think the lessor's footprint will continue to grow. Are we at 50% of the world's commercial aircraft are lessor's aircraft? I think it seems inevitable to me that, leasing companies are here to stay and here to grow. There's change, there's mergers, there's some people getting out of the space. There's no lack of people who want to enter the space. But I think it's a resilient industry, and I suppose I'm back on that minor marketer campaign, maybe for anybody who's listening, to say join it, get on board, because the trends are good. Even the most difficult of projects or situations, people have to work their way through them, and they do. And this industry, the airlines and the lessors and the OEMs, they find a way through it. So to me, yeah, and air travel, people thought COVID maybe would take some of the attractive nature of air travel away, and it wouldn't recover. Well, all the data points I look at, it's recovered, and it's going to grow, and it's going to further recover. We just had Dubai; the orders are still coming in, so the trends are positive. Though I think we've probably, I don't know, when you play this back, we've probably put a few dark clouds over this session, and it's probably been 65-70% a bit miserable and a bit glum, but it's not really. Everybody's still going to work, and lots of people are getting on and off airplanes and going to destinations and doing what they need to do or want to do. And so I think the trends are positive,
you're right.
As my old boss would say, onward and upward, yeah.
No, you're right, Ian. Actually, in my opinion, the whole situation on technical issues we had discussed creates opportunities. Anybody who wants to get in the industry and grow, my experience, there is no better time than a crisis to grow. You get your hand up and you do the job, you grow. That's what my experience has been. That is what the opportunity is. And by the way, you quoted one of our guests says, "Roll up your sleeves and get on with the job." That was Mr. Firoz Tarapure, ex-boss of Donal here, who said that. I think in our episode number 3, I believe he said that. Yes, and you're right.
That was an excellent listen. That was I really enjoyed that one. Yeah.
And leave your hang-ups outside the door.
All right. I'm sure he's going to. I'm going to make sure he listens to this clip, Donal.
He was a great leader. He was. I have to say, or he is. I should say.
Yes.
He's a very inspiring man and very knowledgeable.
Yes. Absolutely.
But look, as Ian said, look at the bright side. The order books are full. You can't get a delivery slot, so there's lots of metal coming down the line. But we need people to work them. And it is a great career. It's a great industry, and people can have a really good career path either whatever side of the business, MROs, airlines, or leasing companies.
True, absolutely, I 100% agree. And gentlemen, we're at the end. I have my mandatory question of any message you have, anything you want to say in the end. I really appreciate. Maybe we go to Ian first this time, and then we go to Donal. Ian.
I'm glad you did that.
Okay. All right. Ian, would you like to go ahead, please?
Yeah, Alok, I'd just say keep knocking out the podcasts or the webcasts, whatever term is the most appropriate for these. We mentioned some of the back issues as such. I think I've watched them all. It's fabulous. And typical stubborn old me, I was a skeptic when you told me you were going to embark on this little mission. But yeah, I think it's great. And just thank you for inviting me on, and thank you, Donal, for your companionship on this. And it's been a nice experience, and I hope it turns out okay. I don't know how much waffle I've contributed there, So I hope your editor can take the nonsense out the way, and this is something half decent for the audience who may choose to watch and listen to it.
See, the world has come far. An Englishman, an Indian, and an Irish are on a podcast. That would have been unimaginable 7 to 8 decades back. I can tell you that.
I think you're doing better than Tim Clark from Emirates. If you're on an Emirates flight and you plug in, you're going to listen to him for an hour, right?
Right. Is it so? Okay. Okay.
You're doing better. You're doing better, Alok.
All right, Donal. I hope that is a compliment. Okay.
Yeah, of course.
So it's your turn, Donal. You have any last message for us, please, on this podcast here?
Well, this was a short notice invitation, so I was awake all night last night, thinking how am I going to last an hour and a half? But now it's 2 hours, and I've managed to survive it, and it was good, and it was relaxed atmosphere, and it's great to have Ian in this conversation because we go back a long time and we don't meet very often, but we're on the same wavelength, and we have been when we dealt with each other, dealing with complex technical issues, and Lee alluded to it. When you look at some of these major issues we've had, when you look in the rear view mirror, you have only good stories to tell and interesting discussions on how we got over it, and you move on to the next problem. But there are difficult times ahead, technically, on some of the issues we talked about. But then the positive side is plenty of orders, plenty of deliveries, plenty of aircraft movements at the moment. Well, extensions probably more than transitions really at the moment. But a crisis brings an opportunity, and this engine issue will bring opportunities for boroscope and MROs. Supply chain also was mentioned on this cast. Supply chain could be a big issue as well. And the relationship between the manufacturers and the providers is critical as well. Because in the past, those relationships mightn't have been great, but they need each other so much now. They need to work on relationships and get the parts manufacturer to fit them to the aircraft and the engines. I've met suppliers who were squeezed a lot in the past, 20 years ago, and they were even thinking about getting out of the business,
Oh, you're right. And while you both were giving me your insights now, it occurred to me that there is so much we have covered, but there is so much which started to hit me again, and I'm like, we didn't talk about this and we didn't talk about that. But I think we will need another 2 hours and another episode of this to record all that. But there is
Part 2 is next Wednesday.
And I'm not so sure, but anyway, it will be there. I'm very sure in the near future. Maybe not next Wednesday, not as soon as that, but it will be there. It will be required. I'm very sure about it. With
It'll be a shorter version.
let's see, Donald. But there is so much more, and I'm glad you both made your time for me today to share your thoughts. And as soon as this episode is ready, we will be. I'm sure this will be very keenly watched and heard by our audience. Please allow me to thank both of you for your precious time today. Thank you very much once more, and wish you a good day ahead. And bye bye. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Alok. Thanks, Ian.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, Donal, a lot.